It's amazing how lockdown can make your imagination run riot. What if certain events in motorsport never happened? And how would that change timelines as we know in this universe? Let's have a look. So this is kind of story time, but with a twist. Why not take events that have happened in the past and see what may or may not have happened if that event had not taken place, or if that driver had not had his career ended, and other bits and bobs like that. It's all a bit of fun, really. But let's call it what it is. Fanfiction. This is fanfiction. Or alternate history hub where instead of the Nazis winning the war, it's a universe where Fanjo never existed or something like that. So just a few rules to establish this sort of series within a series. All of the events up to a certain point in history happen exactly as they happen in the timeline of the universe we currently inhabit. Then, on a nominated day in history, the timeline diverges, and while some events may be the same, the outcome will be vastly different. If you've played the Fallout games, you'll know what I'm talking about. The timeline up until about 1947 is the same as it is in this functional universe that we're in, but instead of the transistor being invented in 1947, it's invented in the late 80s as they focused on atomic tech and things like that instead of making stuff smaller. So in Fallout, you've got a universe where, in 2021, their computers are still running on these things. I keep vacuum tubes lying around the house. As you do. So this story starts on the morning of the 7th of April 1968 in Hockenheim, West Germany. Some of Formula 1's biggest teams and biggest talents are at the track for a Formula 2 race. And among the drivers are Graham Hill, Jean-Pierre Beltoise, Piers Courage, a young Max Mosley, and the hottest property in Formula 1 at that time, Jim Clark. Clark was supposed to be at a race at Brands Hatch, but contractual obligations to Firestone meant he had to be at this race in West Germany, and he wasn't particularly happy all weekend. He couldn't get the car to work as he wanted it to, he was off the pace, and the drizzle in the trees lingered, so visibility was very, very poor. Dave Sims, otherwise known as Beaky, tried everything he could to keep Jim happy, but it seemed that the weekend was cursed. The Cosworth engine kept misfiring because of the cold, the tyres couldn't keep heat, the pressures couldn't stay up, and Jim himself would rather have been at Brands Hatch. And Beaky actually cured the misfire by pouring boiling water on the Cozzy. Cozza. But Jimmy did what he had to do, and he qualified 7th, way behind Beltoise and Henri Pescarolo in their Matras, and those cars often gave Chapman's F2 cars the biggest of headaches. Jimmy had a bad feeling about the race, and he was hoping that the Lotus would just break down, do Lotus things in the first couple of laps so he didn't have to drive in those conditions. He was also having reservations about his racing. In his mind, he was a farmer, not a racing driver. At least, that's what he kept telling himself. And he was wanting to go back to raising sheep just north of the English border with his girlfriend, but his loyalty to Colin Chapman kept him racing. The first heat started and Jimmy got off the line with a ton of wheel spin, but as he exited turn 1, it was just thick spray. He, Mosley and the others were using the tops of the trees to navigate because they could barely see 100 yards or so in front of them, and in those days, there were no chicanes. You entered the Oss curve at 170 miles an hour, and nobody was bothering to overtake because it was just too dangerous. Jimmy dropped to 8th as he got a bad exit of turn 1 on lap 2, and then as he completed lap 4, he didn't reappear. It was about 10 minutes later when a marshal appeared at the Lotus garage, and the race was still continuing. He approached the team and asked to see Jim Clark's mechanic in broken English. Beaky stepped forward and they climbed into a Porsche course car to go and find a Lotus in the trees. The rear suspension, the gearbox and the engine were separate to the main tub, and standing next to it, inspecting the wreckage and looked like he'd just got back from the trenches, was Jim Clark. Clark's tyre had delaminated, and then he'd done a full 900-degree spin and gone backwards up the track. But by some miracle, he was able to bleed off the speed whilst going backwards, and then as the car hit the grass verge, it spun another couple of times and hit a tree side on with the rear tyres. It was going slow enough that Jimmy wasn't ejected or seriously injured in the cockpit, and Beaky looked at the wreckage, looked at Clark, and then took him back to the pits. When they returned, Graham Hill was waiting for them. Now Chapman wasn't at the race, like he was in real life, so by default, Graham was in charge. He turned to the mechanics and basically said, "Right, I've got some lads from next door to help us. We're packing everything up, and we're getting out of here." Chapman, though, was pretty livid at both of the drivers for withdrawing from the race, but he later calmed down when he realised why they'd done so and the severity of the situation. Clark came out of his shell a little bit more, the nervous Scott replaced by someone more willing to speak up, and actively joined his friend Jackie Stewart in the quest for safety. With Stewart, Brabham, Clark and Hill now at the front of driver safety, more and more drivers came to Stewart's way of thinking. They realised that Jimmy had almost been killed. He avoided being killed through sheer talent, while they had to leave their fate due to pure luck. And Stewart also managed to convince Clark to see out the rest of the season. The Lotus was massively improved since the previous year, and Clark had already won the first round in South Africa on New Year's Day, as well as the Tasman Series Down Under. The Lotus dominated the rest of the season, particularly Clark's Lotus, given how gentle he was on the car and also being blisteringly quick at the same time. Somehow, I don't know how he did it either. He would win in Spain, Monaco, Belgium and the USA on his way to title number 3, with Graham second and Stewart in third. But over the course of the season, the relationship between Chapman, Hill and Clark broke down to almost irreparable levels. Hill and Clark thought the Lotus was unsafe, and Hill gave Chapman a simple demand: make it safe, or Jimmy and I walk. Clark stayed on for 1969, and improvements in safety were made to the Lotus 49 that they'd been driving the previous 2 years. And that car would be driven by him and Hill once more. Stewart and the Ken Tyrrell-led Matra team had built on their previous year's car, and it was more reliable than Lotus, even as fast as the Lotus. Hill's car kept on braking, while Clark was able to nurse his to second in the championship, a single point behind his friend Stewart. Then in the March of 1969, the Ford Motor Company got in contact with Clark with regards to driving one of their cars at a race in France in June. Now, Ford had won Le Mans the last 3 years as part of their little spat with Enzo Ferrari, and they were entering Le Mans as a factory team for one last time, hoping to give Enzo one last big star-spangled all-American middle finger. They wanted two of the hottest properties in Formula 1 at that time in their car, the GT40. And who better to have in that car than their two European poster boys? Clark and Stewart would get one of the GT40s to share between them. The other was driven by the real winners of 1969 24 Hours of Le Mans, Jackie Ickx and Jackie Oliver. At the start, it would be Stewart and Ickx that protested the traditional Le Mans start, as they walked to their car from the opposite side of the start-finish straight and took their time to do up their belts. They were the last to leave the pits, and 24 hours later they crossed the line 1 and 2. Clark and Stewart first, followed by Ickx and Oliver. With his Indy 500 win in 1965 and Monaco win in 1968, Jim Clark became the first man ever to win motorsport's Triple Crown, and in this timeline, he'd be the only person to do it, and in doing so, solidified his status as the best driver of all time. The Le Mans win kept him racing. Safety improvements were being made, and in 1970 the F1 drivers boycotted the Nürburgring, and Clark himself refused to race at Spa following the death of Bruce McLaren. With a tough start to 1970 as he adapted to this new concept of downforce, he would win at the Dutch, French, British and German Grand Prix while retiring in Italy and getting 2 second places at Watkins Glen and Mexico to complete title number 4. It has to be noted at this point, Graham Hill and Jim Clark were still driving for Lotus. Jochen Rindt wasn't at Lotus, so in this timeline, Jochen Rindt survives, but we'll get into all that at the end in terms of differences and things like that. Clark would then repeat the feat in 1971 and 1972 to take his total number of world titles to 6, one more than the great Juan Manuel Fangio. His total win tally would go up to 36, a record that would stand until the early 1990s. And what's even more impressive is that he won all 6 titles with just one team. Even with the fallouts with Colin Chapman, he still remained loyal to Lotus. At the end of the 1972 season, Clark, now 36, would retire, and Stewart would take the title in 1973, as he would in real life, and then Stewart would retire after his 100th Grand Prix, in which Francois Sever survives. Clark would then retire to his farm with his wife and would become an ambassador for young farmers in Scotland. In this timeline, Jochen Rindt survives the 1970 season, but because he was never at Lotus at the right time, he doesn't become a world champion. And the same goes for Sever in 1973 as Tyrrell starts its downfall. Graham Hill did have an accident at Watkins Glen in 1969, like in real life, but due to safety improvements on the Lotus, he was back for the 1970 season with significantly fewer injuries than what he sustained in reality. He would then leave Lotus at the end of 1972, and then drive for BRM again before retiring at the end of 1975 without starting his own Formula 1 team. And Jackie Stewart ended up being a two-time world champion before his retirement, but still became the face of motorsport safety. So this has been the first of Formula 1 alternate histories. Hopefully it's been a bit of fun for you all. It's been interesting, and I've tried to make things as realistic as possible. You know, it's fantasy, but still, there are limits. Now obviously I'll do Senna and Beloff and people like that, so there is all that to look forward to, but I rather enjoyed that one, as the outcome was that Clark would be the greatest all-round driver of all time, which many, including myself, regard him as being. A happy ending all round. Kind of. You know, McLaren still dies. So if you've enjoyed this, give it one of these, and for the next instalment, go on and click subscribe. Massive thanks, as always, go out to the patrons of this channel on Patreon, and if you wish to join them or join in the chatter on Twitter and Discord, I'll leave all the relevant links in the description box for you. So until next time, I've been AdmiralLaWind, have a great day wherever you live in the world, and I'll see you all again very soon for another video. So until then, goodbye. So in Fallout, you have a universe where computers in 2021 are still running on these things. What the f***?